know, I thought I could do this. But as soon as Kate started talking, it was January, I think, of 2008. Sunday morning at church. Let me tell you, my name is Lynn Hopkins. I'm an ordained Unitarian Universalist minister. I moved here from Georgia, where I did most of my training. And it was in Georgia at my small suburban congregation there that we had a guest speaker one morning. Her name is Martina Correa. She was the sister of Troy Anthony Davis. And she told Troy's story. Those who have been active in fighting the death penalty for some time know his name. Many people still do not. But the story was utterly horrifying. As she stood before our congregation and told about the events of this one night in 1987 in which a Savannah police officer was shot dead, and Troy was peeking around the back of the building to see what was going on. He heard the shots and took off running. And within days, he was in jail for that crime. He was convicted in relatively short order and sentenced to death at 21 years of age. And on the surface, it's, of course he was. He was a young black man in the wrong part of Savannah, and it was a white police officer who was killed. It was a done deal once they had a name. It didn't matter. But as I heard the details of this story, and I know it's his sister talking, and you can't but believe maybe a quarter of what she says because she loves him. But my God, if even a half of what she said is true, we need to find out. We need to do something about this. So my partner and I went home that day and we wrote Troy a letter. And he wrote right back. And in his letters was still the sweet 19-year-old kid who had been out there behind the building that night. 20 years later, he had been in prison, but, you know, he wrote goofy letters and made little smiley faces with tongue sticking out. And told us raunchy stories about what goes on in prison. And told us goofy tales about his sisters. And told us about what happened that night and about how his friend Daryl had said, come here, Red's beating up on somebody back behind the pool hall. And they went and they looked, and sure enough, Red had this old drunk guy on the ground, and Red wanted his beer, and Larry wouldn't give up his beer, and after pistol whipping him, Officer Mark McPhail came around the corner, identified himself, and was shot in the chest and then in the face and killed. And you know, there were 9 non-police, non-forensic witnesses at the trial. 7 of them recanted. 7 of them said it wasn't true. I said it because I was facing charges. I said it because they told me I would lose my children. I said it because I was in jail and I was afraid. 7 of them. There's only 2 that haven't recanted. One of them, his story wasn't credible from the beginning. I mean, he couldn't identify the man. He told the police that he wouldn't be able to identify the man who did the shooting. He told the police that there that night, and he told them again a month later, and yet somehow, magically, 2 years later in court, he's able to point him out. So his story was never credible. And the ninth one is the guy that actually shot this police officer dead, who is still in Savannah, free today. Well, like I said, Troy returned our letter, and he returned every letter within a day. By the time his case got international notoriety, he had hundreds and hundreds of letters stacked up. The police will only let you have 5 at a time when you're in solitary in Georgia. I don't know what it's like in Colorado, but I sure have seen what happens when we think of a man as a rabid dog. And you know, the warden at the prison was on the Savannah police force when this happened. And he had it out for Troy from the day he first arrived. But we knew that the truth would come out. I mean, you gotta know. It was so obvious. There was literally no physical evidence. And we went to the state Supreme Court hearing, and the unthinkable decision came out. And then the federal hearing. And I had to get up and leave. I couldn't stand to listen to this madness in the federal court hearing, the appeals court. But they assured me, those who stayed, it was okay, it was good. They said what they needed to say, but the federal appeals court said no. Finally, the Supreme Court this was the third time that Troy was facing execution, the third time that we gathered with his family in Jackson, Georgia. The Supreme Court said, well, it's true, there is no guarantee that an innocent man can't be executed. The Constitution does not guarantee an innocent man the right not to be executed. However, the court should hear this again. We should do an evidentiary hearing because there's something wrong with the evidence. I went to that hearing, and let me tell you, Franz Kafka has never written a scarier story. I felt like I was in some kind of bizarre nightmare in that courtroom. The judge literally just changed the rules at whim. What he had said he would accept, he didn't. It was obvious. It was so obvious that this judge had made up his mind and didn't care about the truth that the newspaper reporter sitting next to me in the courtroom had to get up and leave. She couldn't stomach anymore. The only thing that they proved at that hearing was that no, the state really didn't have any evidence at all against Troy. There never was. The eyewitness testimony was all bogus. The state witnesses were inconsistent. The few that might have been telling the truth, and yet it just keeps going. And on September 21st, 2011, they came into Troy's home where he had been confined without hope of doing damage to anyone. They took him from his home, shackled him, walked him down the hall, put him on a gurney, and killed him. And the only reason I can think of is we had to kill somebody. And that was the easiest one. You know, Troy, he tried to be friends with everybody. The only thing he ever asked us for was, would you please call this man's sister and let her know that her brother is in the infirmary because he got beat up, but he'll be okay. You know, could you please call this man's aunt? Could you, I'm going to send you a card for somebody. Could you forward it on? He never asked for anything else. I've never told anybody this story that I'm about to tell you. No one outside of the room that day knows this, but the day before he died, I sat next to Troy's girlfriend, and he asked me, would I marry them? And I said, well, it's not official. I don't care. We just want to have that. That's the kind of man this was. I hated Georgia. Sometimes the only thing that makes me remember how much I love people there is how much I hate it. And I thought I might never get out. And now I think I might end up having to go back. Because there's a fight to be fought. But y'all got to fight here too.